You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is the podcast where I interview authors of thrillers, mysteries, and suspense novels. This is episode number 40, and it features an interview with A.C. Fuller, who is an author of media thrillers, and he's also the creator and host of his very own podcast called the Writer 2.0 Podcast, where he interviews award-winning writers and publishing experts. A.C. has a journalism background. He was a journalist in New York, and he was also an adjunct professor of journalism at NYU, and he now teaches English at Northwest Indian College near Seattle, and he's also teaching writing in the States and internationally, so it's a great background that he has. We're going to learn more about that and about his media thrillers, so we're going to be listening to episode 40 here in a sec. I want to ask you to please rate and review this podcast over at iTunes. Really helps get the word out, and visit our sponsor, audibletrial.com/MTTA. A lot of great thriller audiobooks that you can download there for free through that link. So I appreciate your support, and here is episode number 40 with A.C. Fuller. How are you doing, A.C.?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. Your media thrillers, that really got my attention, so I'm really excited to talk to you about that because it's sort of a new subgenre for me.
It's a new one for everyone, actually. I'm not trying to hijack your podcast, but I've been writing to Amazon for about a year now saying, hey, why don't you add a genre called journalistic thriller or journalism thriller or media thriller? And I'm hoping they'll do that at some point.
Hey, that'll be great. Then you'll be like the leader of that new subgenre, that category.
There should be a genre. I mean, they've got legal thrillers, they've got medical thrillers, they've got all sorts of stuff. I think journalism thriller or media thriller should be a genre. But
yeah, when I saw your media thriller, it totally made sense. It wasn't like, I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like that'd be a real cool subgenre. So, but could you before we get into all that, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So. After college, I worked as a chef for a while, but I was also doing freelance journalism, just with small papers in New York. Then I was a freelance reporter for a while in New York City. I taught in the journalism school at NYU for 2 years. So I taught writing, I taught First Amendment law, and news gathering law, which is all the law relating to journalists. Stuff like, are they allowed to photograph you on the street? Or, are they allowed to climb a tree outside your house and photograph you in your yard? And then all the bigger picture stuff like First Amendment law, freedom of speech, and all that stuff. So I taught that at NYU. And then my wife and I moved out to the West Coast, Pacific Northwest near Seattle, where she grew up. Mostly because she wanted to be near her family and I wanted to have time to write, really to get serious about my own writing. The journalism thing for me was always great, but I always knew I wanted to write novels and write fiction. So we moved out here, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I got really serious about writing fiction. I also got a job teaching part-time English at a small college out here. So I teach English and I write, and I've got few books out now, more coming, and I'm sure we'll talk about those, but that's kind of the short version of my story. Now my day-to-day is teaching English. I host the Writer 2.0 podcast and spend a lot of time with my kids and a lot of time writing and promoting my books.
Your journalism background is so fascinating because a couple of my favorite authors, like the big, like John Sanford and Michael Connelly, were journalists.
Right.
Do you find, is that what you learned as a journalist, is that something that you applied to your writing today, to writing fiction?
Absolutely. And deep down, even when I went to journalism school and was doing journalism, I kind of knew I really want to be writing novels at some point, and I got to find a way to do that. But it was great training because there's a few things you learn. One is you get exposed to a lot of different parts of the world that you wouldn't normally be exposed to. And I don't just mean traveling. I mean more like you get in a lot of rooms that you normally wouldn't get into, like behind the scenes in, political things, or getting into prisons to write stories, things like that, just places that aren't accessible to non-journalists. So that's really cool. But the other part is just learning how to write on deadline. When you've got a story and you have an hour and it has to be 700 words long and you have to turn it in or you're fired, you just learn how to write really fast, and you learn how to write with a schedule, and you learn how to not just wait until you feel creative in order to write, because you just have to do it, and not to downplay the creative side. There's a ton of creative side too, but that for me was really good training because I was a really big procrastinator for a long time, and I still can be from time to time. But just the ability to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write my 2,000 words before breakfast today. That training really for me was the most valuable part of journalism.
Do you use your skills when you're doing research and to interviewing people? I mean, is that something that you're able to do with your trading?
Yeah, I think it is. When you're doing journalism, you get rejected quite a bit when you ask people for interviews and they say no, or in most cases they just never respond to you. Mm-hmm. When you're a freelance journalist and you're pitching stories and you're trying to write stories, and magazines and newspapers and editors just reject you most of the time. And that's really good training for being a writer. And I think especially for the marketing side of writing and the networking side of writing, it's really useful just to kind of go forward with a somewhat fearless attitude. Like, I'll probably get rejected 8 times out of 10, but that's okay. You're just used to that. So I think that is really useful because starting my podcast, I thought, well, I'm just going to ask the biggest name writers I know to come on my podcast and talk about writing. And most of them said no, but some really big name thriller and crime authors said yes. And I think that the journalism training for me helped me just get used to the fact that I'm going to get rejected a lot of the time, but it's the 2 out of 10 who say yes that are going to stick. And that's what matters.
Great. That was something that I had to learn the hard way too. At first, I was intimidated asking people to be on this podcast.
Right.
Now, after doing it for almost 2 years, a year and a half now, I've gotten used to it. But yeah, so you started right off from the beginning that I know I'm going to get rejected, so I'm just going to start asking. Whereas I slowly got the courage.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, like, I don't know, why not throw it out there? And the funny thing is, most of the time you don't even get rejected. In my experience, most of the time I just never heard back. Mm-hmm. And I think of it like the authors. Like, I'm a small time author compared to a lot of the people I was asking, and I can barely keep up with my email and my Facebook messages and all that stuff. Like, I barely have time to get it all in. I can't even imagine how big name authors do it. Some of them have assistants, so I just don't take it personally. If they never write back, I might try again. Yeah. I've tried Walter Mosley about 12 times. His assistant said yes, and then he got sick, and then a bunch of things happened, and I'm still trying 2 years later to get Walter Mosley.
Oh, that'd be an awesome one. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
We'll see. I don't think it's happening. He stopped returning my emails, but
hey, you never know.
I'm gonna keep trying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I learned too. But most, like you said, a couple never replied, and that's fine. And actually, I had a couple who said no, but they were very cool about it. They emailed me back. I was like, oh, that's really nice of them. They're like, oh, I don't like doing interviews, or I'm just way too busy. Sorry, but so yeah, it's not that bad to get rejected. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit now about your series? The first book is out, right? That's The Anonymous Source.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about this media thriller subgenre and what it's all about, and about Alex Vane and
yeah. So I've got The Anonymous Source came out with a small publisher about a year and a half ago, and my publisher ended up going out of business. And so now I have re-released the exact same book myself, and I just came out with a novella called The Cut Line, which is a prequel to The Anonymous Source. And because of my journalism background and my media background, teaching at NYU, I just love that world. I think it is really good world for thrillers and for mysteries, and really for any kind of books, just because I think it's a really important part of the world that it's useful to think about how the media works and how journalism works. So I wanted to combine my interest in that with my interest in fast-paced thrillers, and so I wrote The Anonymous Source, and the sequel. Actually, the next 2 in the series are already written. They're in editing now and are coming out over the next 6 months, The Inverted Pyramid and The Mockingbird Drive. But I would say they're thrillers that I don't exactly know what to call them. Mainstream thrillers, political thrillers. They're not the kind of thrillers where, like Lee Child style, where there's a guy who can kill 5 people with his bare hands. I like those books. That's just not the kind of book I write. They're more an average guy who gets wrapped up in media conspiracies and all sorts of weird things going on, and has to use more of his intellect rather than his brute strength. So they're not super dark, and there's not like torture or serial killers. They're not paranormal. They're more, I don't exactly know what to call them. Like legal thrillers a little bit, except set in the media world instead of the legal world.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about when I was reading it. Is kind of like John Grisham, like the Firm type of a thing.
Right. Yeah. So I would say that's some people have compared them to John Grisham. I think my writing style is pretty different than his, but the things that are similar are more like you've got an average guy just trying to live his life. And in my case, it's a journalist trying to do his job. And he gets wrapped up in this conspiracy where there is murder and there is high stakes, but he's not kind of like an ex-military badass going out to kill people with his bare hands. So yeah, I would the comparisons to the earlier John Grisham stuff probably make sense in terms of the way the story is. And yeah, it's just a world that I really like to write about. And I think, to me, it's always been important. And I think more and more people these days, especially in the United States, are understanding the importance of the media and how it works and understanding how it works because of the last election and just sort of looking at the big picture of what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of distrust of media, both from all sides, really. And so one of the things I wanted to do in this series was to chronicle the changes in media. So the Anonymous Source is set in 2002, the Inverted Pyramid is set in 2004, and the Mockingbird Drive is set in 2017. So the backdrop is the changes that happened in the newspaper business, the television news business, and then, of course, now in the social media world, and just how all of that is changing. But, of course, that's a backdrop to a fast-paced thriller where this journalist is figuring out who got killed and why.
Yeah, I was going to say, your timing seems really, really good, like you were mentioning with the whole fake news and journalists getting arrested at protests. So it's kind of an interesting time. So it's going to be a good time for this type of subgenre.
Yeah, the novella I just published, it's actually a prequel to the Anonymous Source. It's set in 2000 and about this journalist, Alex Vane, who gets his first major scoop, his first week on the job as a court reporter in New York City. And his first major scoop thrusts him into stardom, and then it turns out that the scoop is not exactly what he thought it was, and all sorts of things come out of that. And it definitely is relevant to the whole fake news thing that's going on, except in a slightly different form. Before the internet had kind of taken over as it has now.
And were you a fan of thrillers as a reader before you started writing the fiction?
I was, yeah, and I still am. I read a lot of different stuff, but I grew up reading when I was, I think, 11, 12 is when John Grisham kind of took off with his books and became kind of a household name right around those years. So I read him when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, in that age. I also read a lot of more literary fiction, short stories, novels, nonfiction. There's some modern thriller writers that I like, particularly the writing style. So I like Lee Child's writing style quite a bit. That kind of first-person voice he uses in a lot of his books. Roger Hobbs, who is similar to Lee Child's, who tragically passed away just a few months ago. His Ghost Man series I enjoy quite a bit. They're not very much like my books in terms of the content or the story, but the writing style is a little more similar. The kind of terse, fast-paced writing style, I like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the Millennium trilogy, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that trilogy. That also would fall into the media thriller category, I think, if there was such a category.
Yeah, the whole billionaire framing the journalist. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I don't know. The Poet is another good one featuring journalist. I don't know. We got to start a little campaign, get this category added to Amazon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it'll be like the forerunner, the Godfather of the media genre.
Well, there's other people who do it, but for me, it's like my main thing. Every single book I have, and I've got a bunch more in the works, they're all centered around that journalist media world. And of course, the more current ones are more based around media websites rather than newspaper reporters, because as we know, newspaper reporters are kind of becoming less and less and less of a thing and becoming less influential.
Yeah, that is amazing what's going to happen in the future. I'm in my late 40s, so newspaper reporters. I mean, it was just they were the where you went for your news and everything, and you looked up at them and stuff. And now it's kind of like all these bloggers and stuff. It's just so weird.
It's really weird. I mean, it's changing so fast we can barely keep up with it. But that's part of the reason I like to write books about it. Is like it gives me the excuse to try to think deeply about what's going on in the world and try to bring a little understanding to it. I wouldn't say I understand it, but at least gives me a chance to think about it and try to slow down a little bit and say, wait a second, what's going on here?
Yeah, and what inspired you to write your first fiction book? What was the catalyst that said, I'm going to give it a shot now?
Good question. I mean, it's kind of an amazing story, actually. I was 31 or 32. I had moved out here with my wife thinking I was going to write. I was actually trying to write nonfiction then. I went to a Thanksgiving Day party with her extended family. We stayed overnight at this place. There was about 50 of her extended family there. I woke up the next morning. I'd had a little bit too much wine the night before, I would say. Mm-hmm. The next morning, I'm sitting around at the table drinking coffee, trying to wake up, and my uncle-in-law sits down next to me and with his teenage daughter who was trying to write poetry. And she said, or he said, you should talk to AC. He's a writer. And I said, not really, because I was still kind of writing on and off, like doing a little bit, then taking a break for a month or losing steam or procrastinating. So, it was kind of that moment when he said, AC is a writer, you should talk to him about writing. And I noticed I didn't think of myself as a writer at all, even though it was literally my job. I was teaching writing at a small college for a living. I had written lots of parts of books and then kind of quit each time, which is what a lot of writers do for a long time. And so then 4 days after that, I started work on the anonymous source. And I don't know why, but it just stuck that time. I said, I'm not going to quit no matter what. I'm going to finish this book and see what happens. And it turned out I had already written a lot. So, it wasn't that hard to actually finish a book. And then after that, it just took off from there. The book did pretty well and is still doing pretty well. And I just feel like I have so many books I want to write. I just hope I live long enough to write them all. But it was just there was an internal switch that just had to flip where I said, okay, no matter how hard this is, I'm just going to try and, keep going this time. And it worked.
And so your first book, you went through the traditional route. You sent query letters and all that process. I
did, yeah. I got rejected by 100 agents for the anonymous source. 2 agents were really close to signing. I was really close to signing with them, and basically what they said was 2 said almost the same thing. I could probably sell this book, but I'm not 100% sure I can sell this book. And I only sign on to books that I'm 100% sure I can sell. That's what 2 different agents told me. One also told me that the main character, Alex, has a love interest who's also really a main character named Camilla in the anonymous source, and she's a little older than him. And one agent told me, can you make her younger and blonde? And, I just wasn't into that. She's a complicated character. And I think, what a lot of people, they're looking for stories that have a slightly more, I don't know what the word is, traditional sexist vibe to them, maybe. And they just weren't into that part of it. So, yeah, I went through that whole process, and it was actually good. I got a lot of good feedback from a couple editors at big publishers and one agent, and made the book as good as I can. And then I ended up getting a small publisher without an agent, a small Seattle-based publisher who ended up putting it out. And then the book did pretty well. And then they announced 11 months later that they were going out of business.
Oh.
So luckily the rights reverted back to me, and I kept control of the book, which doesn't always happen when your publisher goes out of business. But it was a good process. And now I'm thrilled that I'm self-publishing just because I'm already making more money than I was with the publisher. And the great thing about making more money is it frees me up to write more books, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, now you don't have to you don't have to give a big slice to the publisher and to an agent. So must be a nice difference.
I'm friends with some traditionally published authors who have great publishers and they love it, and I'm also friends with some traditionally published authors who hate their publisher, although they won't say this publicly. They always tell me this after I stop recording on the podcast, who hate their publishers, and their publishers take their books, take most of the money, and then don't market it, and their careers stall, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole story. But, so it's a crapshoot. There's just all sorts of different experiences out there, but I'm pretty happy with how it worked out.
Yeah, I have a friend who was traditionally published. She said the same thing. It was a smaller press, and she was expected to do all the heavy lifting anyway when it came down to marketing and stuff. So didn't in the end, that's why she went self-publishing. She said, "Well, I'm doing all that work anyway." So,
exactly. That's two different publishers offered to republish the anonymous source before I decided to self-publish it. I got two different offers, and both of them, the companies were really small publishers, and I was like, well, what exactly are you going to do other than take half of the money? And they didn't have much marketing or distribution clout. And for me, that's really what I was looking for. So they didn't have much to offer me. So why bother? There are some publishers I'd love to work with out there. They're just, it's really not a world where you want a publisher at any cost if you're a writer.
And how do you, like, when you're writing your books, do you set like a daily goal of like word count, or?
I do, yeah. Lately, it keeps going up.
That's a good thing.
It's very good. When I wrote The Anonymous Source, my goal was to write 500 words a day on average, so 3,500 words a week, because I thought, okay, that's manageable. Now I try to write about 2,500 words a day when I'm writing a new project. Which is, faster than some people, slower than other people. But yeah, about 2,500 words a day. I'm not, there are some periods where I'm not writing at all. Like right now, I'm in a big push to format, and promote and edit books. So I'm not writing 2,500 words a day now, but when I move on to my next project, that's what I'll be aiming at.
And what do you use to write your books? Do you use like Word, or do you use like a writing software?
Yeah, I use Scrivener, which is writing software, which has been great for me. And sometimes I will write wherever I am. I'll text myself 2 paragraphs or speak into a dictation thing if I'm out at the beach with my kids and they're playing, or I'll write on a napkin or on paper and then put it all into Scrivener to organize it. But I love Scrivener because I tend to write books that rely on a certain amount of structure. Mysteries and thrillers often have, they're fairly tightly structured in a lot of cases, and Scrivener is good for being able to restructure books and drag and drop things and move scenes and chapters around and things like that. So I like Scrivener. Yeah,
that's what I used to, and that's my favorite feature. Like, okay, I just came up with a different idea, now I'm going to have to move this chapter over here, and you just drag and drop it.
Exactly, and if you're writing books where it's like, things really have to happen in the right order, it's good to be able to look at a visual interface of like, oh yeah, okay, that happens in chapter 23, and then look back at chapter 11, and to kind of be able to see it all laid out and not have a huge corkboard in my house is a good thing.
Yeah. And so you're doing the formatting yourself, or do you outsource that, or?
I am. I just learned formatting literally last week.
Oh, wow.
Learned formatting. I bought a program called Vellum, Vellum, and it's expensive program, but I know I'm going to be doing a lot of books, so I bought that, and it's surprisingly easy to use. And I'm kind of a control freak and a perfectionist, both with the writing and the formatting, and so it's useful to be able to do it myself. Mm-hmm. So I just decided to learn it, and I put out the cut line just 3 days ago. It came out, and I did all the formatting on that myself, and I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I like your covers too. Did you do those, or you have?
I do not do those. Visually, I'm partially colorblind, and if I did a cover, it would look like absolute garbage. So no, I have a cover designer who does all that for me. I have input, obviously, and I have a team of people I ask for feedback about the different covers, but I'm not able to design anything. It would look so amateurish if I designed a cover. It would be comical.
Yeah, that's best leave that to the professionals if you don't have that talent.
Exactly.
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
it'd be like
it can get up. There's some ugly covers out there, and I feel bad for people because it's so important to have a good cover if you want to sell books.
Yeah, it absolutely is. That's what grabs everyone's attention, especially with all the different promo sites. Like, like BookBub. That's when I get the thrillers, and the first thing I do is I just scan through the email, and the covers is what grabs my attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit before I hit the recording. So you have a big promo coming up, right, with BookBub?
I do, yeah. On January 30th, I have a BookBub promotion. But listeners to your show, if they're listening to this on either the 30th or 31st of January, they can go get the anonymous source for free on Amazon. If they're an Amazon person on a Kindle, they can just go get it. It'll be 100% free, no strings attached, January 31st and 30th. That's Monday and Tuesday. So that's pretty cool. And then it will be back up to full price by Wednesday morning.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect, because this is we're on Thursday, but this podcast will air on Tuesday morning. So if you're listening to this, you gotta move quickly. But yeah, because that's usually it's $3.99, so that's a pretty nice savings.
It is, yeah, and it's it's a pretty good book. I think people seem to like it, and yeah, I want to get it into as many hands as possible now that I have the sequel. The Inverted Pyramid is up for pre-order, and then the Cut Line is also out. If people read the anonymous source and like it, they can find out what Alex Vane was up to a couple years before the events in the anonymous source.
Yeah, that's great. And do you find, like, does your personality, does it make it into your characters? And is there a little bit of you and Alex Vane?
I would say yes. The two main characters in the anonymous source are Alex and Camilla. And I would say there's parts of me that are really both of them. Parts of me made it into both of those characters. There's many ways I'm not like either of them, but there's little bits that made it in. I mean, obviously, on kind of a more superficial level, Alex is a journalist in New York City, and I was once a journalist in New York City, though I never had the job he had. I was more of a freelance, part-time kind of journalist. But there are some other elements. I would say his ability to write fairly quickly, his interest in getting to the bottom of things, definitely I share.
And when you start to get ready to write your books, I mean, do you have, like, are you a big outliner, or do you just kind of just start writing?
With the anonymous source, I just started writing. Other books I've tried to outline, not as much in detail as some people do, but I outline the big story points. I usually have them roughly mapped out in my head. Not just in my head, I write them down. Usually I have about 12 major turning points or sections in a book. Each one might be around 30 pages in a finished book. And there's just big twists and turns that I'm aiming at. And sometimes those change as I'm writing, but I do have those mapped out pretty well before I start, usually.
And so you said you already have two more of the Alex Vane's thrillers that will be published later on this year. Is that what you're working on right now?
Yeah, they're both written already, actually. I'm editing right now. But the Inverted Pyramid is going to be book 2. I'm calling the Cut Line book 0 because it's a novella and it's a prequel. So it's good. It's just kind of off to the side a little bit. But book 2 is going to be the Inverted Pyramid. Book 3 is going to be the Mockingbird Drive. Both of those are already written. They're just in editing, and they're going to come out in April and then in July of 2017.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, you have it all organized. And I just took a look at Amazon. I see you already have the Inverted Pyramid for sale.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep. The pre-orders are already up, and they're already moving out the door. So people are waiting for that book. Because my publisher went out of business, that book was supposed to come out months ago. But when my publisher went out of business, that threw everything for a loop. So I'm excited to finally get it out.
Yeah, how do you like the pre-order process? I'm too chicken to try that out, but I guess that's with your background and your training that helps you out with the deadlines.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely adds some pressure to it because I really better get it out now. But I like the pre-order process. I think it depends strategically. It depends on just what you're trying to do in terms of marketing. But I like it because, for example, with this BookBub promotion I have coming up, there's going to be, if it goes like my last one, 40 to 60,000 people will download the book in 24 hours. And a lot of them are going to read it. And some of them are going to like it enough to want to go buy the sequel. So I'd rather have the sequel up and available while their attention is on it so that they can go find it and pre-order it. And then April 23rd, it will just download to their device automatically. Whereas last time when I had a book bub, I didn't have any pre-orders up. I didn't have any other books up or anything out. So people read the book, they liked it, and they said, damn, why isn't there a sequel out? Where's the sequel? Get the sequel out. So now I actually, even though the book is not 100% done yet, it's going to be on time. And, that's just, it's a nice way to keep people's attention and give them something else to go grab while they're enjoying the first book.
Yeah, I was just looking at one of your reviews. This is going to be the coolest blurb for review that I've ever seen. Read the literary equivalent of heroin.
Yes.
How awesome is that?
That's my favorite sentence, and I have no idea who that was. That's just a random Amazon reviewer, but I took that out and I put it on all my stuff now.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's a cool line.
That's a lot of people have said it's addictive because I write fairly short chapters, fairly fast, a lot of stuff happening fairly quickly, and my writing style has been called terse or short. There's not going to be a 3-paragraph description of a sunset in one of my books, most likely, at least nothing I've written, which is pretty typical for thrillers. They're fairly fast-paced, a lot of going on. So, yeah, I love that someone compared it to heroin, only in the sense of that it's addictive and makes you feel good, I think.
Yes. We don't want to encourage anybody to go try heroin.
Not at all. But no, I mean, I think that reviewer meant it in the sense of, that she or he got hooked, and hopefully they'll get hooked on the rest of the series. I'm really excited to get these next ones out.
Yeah, and then so what's your plan long term? Are you going to continue writing in this series?
Yeah, I've got as many books in this series as I could possibly want. The third book, The Mockingbird Drive, is set in 2017 in Seattle and Las Vegas, and it definitely opens up the possibility for a lot more books in the series. So I'll definitely continue with this series, but I also have another series which I have not even written the first book of yet, but I'm mapping out another series that is going to be a thriller. Again, similar, a political journalistic thriller, more political in the sense that it's more centered around politics and probably the 2020 election and social media. And I can't say too much about it yet because it's still kind of in the infancy phase. But my goal is to get the first book in that series out by the end of 2017 also. So the Mockingbird Drive will be the third Alex Vane novel in July, and then I'm hoping by maybe the fall, October-ish, to get the first in this new series out, which I'm so excited about. This series is keeping me up at night. I just can't wait to write it.
Oh, I love that feeling.
I have to stay disciplined and finish the editing and proofing and formatting of these other books because, obviously I want them to be as good as possible. So I've got a few months of work ahead of me before I can really turn my attention to that. But that will be coming too.
So from the time you start to write the book, the first draft, to the time that it's available for sale how long does that process usually take you?
So, man, it's so different now than it was with the anonymous source. It took me 5 months to write the first draft, and then I edited it for over a year, multiple drafts, multiple readers, I paid an editor, submissions to agents. It took just forever. Now I just keep getting faster and faster, and with the control of self-publishing, everything is faster. So the cut line, I wrote that. It's a 25,000 word novella. I wrote that in 8 days, and then edited for about a week. Really serious editing. I had 3 beta readers and then an editor/proofreader, and the whole thing from start to when it hit Amazon was something like 24 days. For a 25,000 word novella, which is a lot faster than other things have been for me, and still slower than what other people do.
That's amazing for me. I'm like, wow.
It's amazing for me too. It's just way faster than I've ever done anything. I did not think I could do that. Mm-hmm. And writing that 8 days, I wrote about 3,000 words a day roughly. And what I was surprised by was just that it gets easier, mm-hmm. and that's the most thing. And also, a novella is a simpler, more contained story, so there wasn't as much research involved as there is in some of my books. So it went pretty fast, but I don't know. I think that once I have these next 2 books out, I'm really thinking I'll be able to do a full-length book in 10 weeks, I would say, from when I first start writing to when it comes out, probably a month to write a first draft at 3,000 words a day for a month, and then a month of editing and proofing, and then a month of formatting, cover design, etc., or more like 2 weeks of formatting, cover design, etc. So I think that I'll be able to do a full-length book every 8 to 10 weeks is my idea, and possibly faster. I don't know. I don't like to sacrifice on quality, and so for me, I can't put anything out that hasn't had at least 5 or 7 readers and a professional editor and proofreader. Just because I'm an English teacher, I can't stand errors and things like that. But at the same time, I think the sky's the limit. I'm getting a lot faster, and that's exciting for me.
So how do you handle when you start getting back comments from different readers? Do you use like Word, like the tracking, the comments and things like that? Is that how you keep track of the beta readers? Yeah.
So this last time with the cut line, I tried something new, which I stole from Michael Anderle, who is a sci-fi writer who I know you know. He uses Google Docs, and I decided to try Google Docs. So I took my whole book, which is roughly 100-ish pages, the cut line. I put it up on Google Docs, and I shared it with 3 people who had volunteered to beta read it, and my wife, who is one of my editors. She's not, I pay an editor too, but she's sort of my first editor. And they all were reading it at the same time and making comments at the same time. So it was a very quick process. They all read it in a couple days, and then I spent probably one day of about 14 hours going through the comments and line by line rewriting stuff, fixing typos. Sometimes they would just say something like, this is kind of weak, this sentence or this paragraph, and I would figure out how to improve it. So that's how I did it with this last one, and it worked pretty well. I think I'm going to try the same process the next time I have a book get beta read. The last time I did it, it was much more haphazard than that. I sent it out to 10 different people in 10 different formats, and it was just a huge pain in the butt to reconcile all their comments.
Yeah, that's what I struggle with beta readers. I really, really like that when you describe that Google Docs process. I'm going to probably try that myself as well because, I got overwhelmed. All of a sudden, all these different Word docs out floating around with different comments and stuff. I was like, how do I consolidate all this?
Yeah, and it is overwhelming. I mean, and I would say it was still almost overwhelming the way that I just did it. It was still because, one person couldn't use Google Docs, so I sent her the book in Microsoft Word, so her comments were separate, and they were really good comments. Like, everyone's comments are useful, and you want to take them all seriously, but kind of keeping it all straight in your head and really being clear that you're improving the book and not making it worse when you're taking these suggestions is important. And so it was still, that part is just hard. For me, there's no way around it. That part is just a tough part of the process.
Yeah. All right. Well, AC, I'm not going to take too much more of your time here, but I want to encourage our listeners also to go visit your site. I've been looking at it. You got a lot of great information. It's acfuller.com because you have a lot of cool info for writers as well, because I know a lot of our listeners are also writers or aspiring writers. And you have a great podcast as well. I've been listening to a couple of your episodes. So, are you active on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter at AC Fuller Author, both places. And yeah, the podcast is on my website, acfuller.com. It's on iTunes. It's really a podcast for writers, not just thriller writers, but I interview writers from all different genres. Although it probably leans a little more toward thrillers. Just because that's what I write, but I've had romance writers, nonfiction writers, all sorts of writers on there. And yeah, it's just the writing business, the writing craft, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah, so before I let you go, do you have any advice for our aspiring writers that are listening to this?
My number one piece of advice is always just start immediately, right when you're done listening to this podcast, or even pause the podcast and start immediately and just start trying to write consistently if that's something that you've struggled with. Not everyone struggles with that, but I always did. And I regret how many years I let go by that I wasn't writing consistently because I felt bad that my writing wasn't good enough, or that my writing was, too amateurish or too, I can't think of the word, but there was also all sorts of to this, to that with my writing, and it kept me from actually doing it. And doing it is the number one way to get better. And so I would just say, put down everything, start immediately. If you can set a small word goal of 200 words a day, 500 words a day, 1,000 words a day, whatever's realistic, do that and try to stick with it. Or a weekly word goal if you can't write every day. And that's the number one way to get better, and just do it. And then also listen to podcasts like this to start learning about the business, because that a lot of people don't write because they're afraid of the business. And the more you can learn about the business, I think the better. It'll free you up to write what you really want to write, if you're not avoiding the business side of it.
Yep, that's good advice, because both are so important, the writing and the business part.
Exactly, yeah. And unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, the days of writing a book and sending it off to an agent who takes care of everything they're not over, but they're mostly over.
Yeah.
And so it does still happen. It's just getting rarer and rarer. But the bright side is that the control and the power of self-publishing is really insane right now, where people are going from non-writers to having a really good career in 12 months, in 2 years sometimes. And that's a huge positive that's going on in the book world right now.
Yep, it's exciting times, that's for sure. All right, AC, thank you so much again for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. It was real nice talking to you.
It's great talking to you. Thanks for having me, Alan.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. You can learn more about this podcast and about future interviews over at the website at www.thrillingreads.com/podcast. And if you haven't done so yet, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. You can do it on Stitcher, or you can do it by email over at the website. I'd also like to invite you to join the mailing lists so you never miss an episode. And I'd also like to invite you to visit my author page at Facebook, Alan Peterson Books, and also my website, alanpeterson.com.